Hello everyone, and welcome to Behind the Bulletin. We're glad you're joining us today. In this episode, we're exploring a deeply emotional story that has captured widespread attention. Yu Long finally breaking his silence with a heartbreaking confession, "I failed as a father." A moment that left Mei Mei unable to hold back her tears. What led to this painful admission? What truth has remained hidden for so long? And why did this moment resonate so deeply with so many people? Stay with us as we uncover the story behind the words, the emotions, and the consequences. Starting right now. For years, Yu Long was known as a man of composure. In public, he rarely raised his voice. In private, he avoided explanations. And whenever questions turned toward family, his response was always the same: silence. That silence became his shield, his habit, and eventually, his burden. The story that followed him was not loud at first. It existed in fragments. A strained relationship. Missed moments. A daughter who grew up faster than expected. Those who knew the family sensed something unresolved. But no one dared to say it out loud. Until the silence became impossible to ignore. Mei Mei had always been emotional, but resilient. She smiled in public. She endured interviews. She defended him when others criticized his absence. But behind closed doors, the cracks were widening. Those close to her noticed how she avoided certain topics. Her voice trembled when the word father was mentioned. It wasn't anger. It was disappointment, the kind that settles deep and refuses to leave. The turning point came during a private gathering meant to be quiet. Almost unnoticeable. No cameras. No scripts. Just a small group of people and a long history hanging heavily in the air. That was when Yu Long finally spoke. "I was wrong," he said. Not loudly. Not dramatically, but clearly enough that the room fell silent. He admitted what he had avoided for years. That he had chosen distance over presence. That responsibility had been postponed, disguised as duty, ambition, or exhaustion. That he had convinced himself there would always be time to fix things later, until later arrived too late. Mei Mei listened without interrupting. Her hands were clenched. Her eyes fixed on the floor. When he said the words, "I failed as a father," the composure she had maintained for so long finally broke. Tears came without warning. Not explosive, not theatrical, but quiet and uncontrollable. The kind of tears that carry years of unspoken pain. No one moved. No one tried to comfort her. Because in that moment, the truth demanded to be felt. What followed was not reconciliation, but reckoning. Yu Long did not ask for forgiveness. He did not justify himself. Instead, he spoke about fear, the fear of inadequacy. The fear of being exposed as flawed. That facing his daughter would force him to confront the man he had become. He admitted that silence had been easier than accountability. And distance easier than vulnerability. The public learned of this moment days later. The story surfaced unexpectedly. Not through gossip, but through quiet confirmation. The reaction was immediate. Shock, sympathy, anger, understanding, all colliding at once. People debated whether honesty came too late, or whether it still mattered. Mei Mei said nothing at first. When she finally did, it was brief. "Some truths hurt more than lies," she said. "But they are still necessary." Her words resonated far beyond the situation itself. Parents saw themselves reflected in Yu Long's regret. Children recognized the weight in Mei Mei's tears. This story became more than a personal confession, it became a mirror. Yu Long stepped away from public appearances. Not as punishment, but as consequence. He began rebuilding quietly. Through statements or gestures meant for attention. Through consistency. Showing up. Listening. Accepting discomfort. Understanding that regret does not erase damage. But responsibility can shape what comes next. There was no dramatic ending. No sudden healing. No promise that everything would be fixed. That's precisely why the story lingered. Because real accountability does not end with apologies. Real forgiveness does not arrive on demand. Yu Long's confession did not redeem him. It exposed him. Mei Mei's tears did not signal weakness. They marked honesty. Together, their story reminded the world of something rarely discussed, that failure within families is often quiet, prolonged, and invisible until it finally demands to be seen. The most shocking revelation was not the confession itself. It was the realization that silence, when held too long, becomes its own form of harm. And sometimes, The bravest thing a parent can do. Finally admit they were wrong. Even if the truth arrives after the damage has already been done. Story does not end here. It continues in choices made away from the spotlight. Conversations without witnesses. In actions that do not need applause. And perhaps that is where real change begins. After the confession, time did not move forward smoothly. It fractured. For Long, every day felt heavier than the last. The words he had finally spoken, words delayed by years of fear and avoidance, echoed back to him in moments of silence. He had expected backlash. Even condemnation. What he had not expected was the quiet. The absence of noise was far more unsettling than outrage. It left him alone with the consequences of his choices. With no crowd to distract him from reflection. Mei Mei, meanwhile, entered a period of emotional exhaustion. The tears she shed that day were not a release, they were an opening. Once the dam broke, memories surged forward, birthdays missed, school events unattended, conversations that never happened. Each recollection carried the same haunting question: why wasn't I enough to make him stay? Those close to her noticed the change. Spoke less, but when she did, her words carried new weight. There was no bitterness in her tone, only honesty sharpened by pain. She no longer tried to protect his image for the sake of harmony, nor did she attack him. Instead, she chose something far more difficult: clarity. The public reaction evolved as well. At first, sympathy leaned heavily toward Mei Mei. Social platforms filled with messages of support. Many from people who saw their own childhood reflected in her experience. But slowly, another conversation began to emerge. One about accountability without erasure. About acknowledging harm without turning regret into spectacle. Some asked whether Long deserved forgiveness. Others asked whether forgiveness should even be part of the conversation. What became clear was this: the story was no longer about redemption. It was about responsibility. Long began attending family counseling sessions quietly, without announcement or documentation. Interviews followed. No updates were shared. Those expecting visible proof of change were left unsatisfied. But those who understood the nature of repair recognized something important: real rebuilding is rarely public. In one private moment, Long reportedly said something that never reached headlines. "I don't need to be forgiven," he said. "I need to be present." That sentence marked a shift. Mei Mei did not immediately respond to his efforts. She observed them, tested them, let silence do what words could not. When she finally spoke to him again, it was not emotional. It was measured. "Consistency matters more than regret," she said. There was no embrace, no dramatic reconciliation. Just a fragile understanding that something new, and uncertain, was beginning. The world moved on to other stories, as it always does. But this one lingered in quieter spaces. In late-night conversations. In households where parents reconsidered the priorities. Adults who still carried the weight of unmet childhood needs. Long and Mei Mei did not become symbols by choice. But their story became one because it exposed a truth many avoid: love, when delayed too long, scars that apologies cannot erase, only actions can soften. The confession did not close a chapter. It opened one that would require patience, humility. Time measured not on days, but in years. Perhaps the most difficult lesson of all was this: speaking the truth is only the beginning. Living it, every day, without applause, is where the real reckoning lies. The silence that once separated them had been broken. Followed would determine whether it was replaced with presence, or simply a different kind of distance. That answer, unlike the confession, would not be spoken. It would be proven. In the end, this story was never just about a confession. It was about time lost, silence chosen, and the courage it takes to finally confront one's own failures. Long's words did not erase the past. Mei Mei's tears did not demand forgiveness. They offered instead was something far more honest, a moment of truth that asked no applause, only reflection. The story reminds us that family wounds are rarely loud, rarely public, and never simple. They form quietly. Years of absence and misunderstanding. And they heal, if they ever do, through patience, presence, and responsibility. Thank you for staying with us through this deeply human story. Your time and attention allow conversations like these to exist beyond headlines and rumors. This has been Behind the Bulletin, where we look beyond the surface to understand why stories matter. Thank you for watching. and we'll see you in the next episode.